Dear brothers and sisters, greetings to you all. Today we shall focus on the theme, Take Off Your Shoes. The third Sunday of Lent invites us to learn more about the same one God, the same food, and to produce fruits. The theme, Take Off Your Shoes, is a call to embrace the same God, to be nourished from the same spiritual food, that is the rock of Christ, and to produce fruits in due season. The first point of our reflection is realizing God's eternal presence. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 8 and 13 to 15, we see how Moses encounters God's enduring presence. This is symbolized by the blazing bush, which was not being burnt up. So the burning bush reveals to Moses God's identity in a nominal form, I am who I am, or a larger descriptive form of this is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. These speak of God's encounters with successive generations. God has not abandoned his chosen ones in the past and will not in the present and future. God's miraculous presence further invites Moses with an order, take off your shoes. Moses needed to take off his shoes, that is, to leave behind his fears and personal plans and thereby embrace God's message of hope. We see that Moses was afraid to look at God, but God was so concerned of him and also of his people. Through this encounter, Moses learns of God's holy presence and God's plan for Israel, the same God who rescues everyone. Moses becomes God's messenger to Israel to liberate them from the hands of Egyptians. This is God's lesson for Moses about the time of the Israelites' liberation, and is asked to respond at once. The second point of our reflection is relying on the rock of Christ, the food of us all. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 6 and 10 to 12, Paul recontextualizes Israel's desert experience to the context of community in Corinth. The Israelites ate the same food, the manna, and drank the same water from the same rock at Massa and Meribah. We see this narration in Exodus chapter 17 and Numbers chapter 20. Despite all this, people failed to please God. Paul spiritualizes these outcomes and speaks of the same spiritual food and spiritual drink. This message is presented as a warning to the new community that they must never complain. Paul presents this message as a lesson for all Christ followers living at the end of this age. Giving up the tendency to complain equals taking off one's shoes and embracing God's holy presence. This is Paul's lesson to the community about God's plan of time, which requires a faithful response without delay. The third point of our reflection is producing fruits in due season. In the concluding part of the preceding chapter, Luke chapter 12, verses 57 to 59, Jesus remarked on reconciliation with one's opponent. In today's gospel passage, Luke chapter 13, Jesus appeals for repentance and exhorts his audience to timely reform. That is, to take off one's shoes and actively embrace God's holy presence. The reading highlights the story about the murdered Galileans, the 18 killed at Siloam, and the parable of the barren fig tree. These details are found only in the Lucan Gospel and belong to the sources available to the evangelist only. The passage appears as a parable of mercy or a parable of crisis containing a call for repentance. Jesus uses the fate of the Galileans killed by Pilate to draw a moral lesson, that is, to call for repentance. Jesus matches the gruesome death of the Galileans with that of the accidental death of 18 Jerusalemites killed by the sudden collapse of a tower in the old wall of the city near the pool of Siloam. What it communicates is that death may face anyone as rapidly as faced by the Galileans and the 18 Jerusalemites. This calls for scrutiny and assessment of one's life. It refers to the critical nature of human existence. The grace period given to the fig tree represents a short period of grace before God's judgment. It is the last hour. The gospel passage not only includes Jesus' contemporaries, but also us in this message. It pertains to every individual Christian faced with the prospect of a sudden end of life. In this context, the parable of the barren fig tree questions and also symbolizes the human life marked by unproductivity. If one lives using all resources and bears no fruit, continuous unproductivity and procrastination, then that person should be ready to face the fate of the barren fig tree. Galileans might have been the victims of Pilate's malice, or 18 Jerusalemites were unfortunate and died by chance. But the fig tree will die because of its inactivity and unproductiveness. The guilt that comes from one's procrastination or lack of decision is greater than that implied by death at someone else's hands or unexpected calamity. Jesus' parable reminds us of the last period of grace granted to reform and to transform our lives. To conclude, God gives us the time to respond. Our response metaphorically is taking off our shoes. This results from recognizing God's holy presence in all and in everything. Moses acted upon it, Paul exhorts the same, and Luke's gospel passage teaches the same moral lesson. We are called to take off our shoes of fear and prejudice and embrace God's plans for our salvation. This requires that we dig deep for repentance. Giving up all our inaction and unproductivity is a form of repentance. To do this, Jesus nourishes us with his body and blood and guides us with his word. May this spiritual food flowing from the same rock, the rock of Jesus Christ, foster and transform our lives. And may these insights help us to experience a meaningful Lenten season. And I thank you all for your patient listening.